Did you think that learning Arabic would be easy? Most people that begin with the language, they actually do think it's easy, because this is what we hear from the scholars, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ, that indeed I have made the Quran easy for the purpose of contemplation. So if the Quran is easy and it's in the Arabic language, then of course by default the Arabic language should also be easy. But this contradicts the experience of many people, because they find that the initial stages of the language are actually very difficult. So why is that? I've been teaching Arabic for the last 20 years to 7,000 students, and along the way I've come across certain things that if my students knew those things before getting started, then it would make it much more fun and much more easier for them to master the language. So inshallah, in this video I'm going to share with you 7 brutal truths that if you know them, then you'll be able to understand and appreciate the Quran 10 times faster. The first thing is this conception that people have that unless I have a massive vocabulary, I'm not going to be able to understand anything. But this is actually the big mistake, and this is what holds back the majority of people, because it fails to take into account that Arabic is unlike other languages. It's completely different. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose it as the medium for his final message, and there's a reason for that. And you need to appreciate this. And that is because within the Arabic language, there are certain elements and features that are unique and specific to Arabic. They're not found anywhere else. And if you wanted to sum all of those elements up in one single word, that word would be comprehensiveness. Ibn Khaldun, he mentioned centuries ago, he said that what makes the Arabic language unique and superior is that what in other languages requires separate words to communicate, Arabic does it through vowels, and does it through patterns, and does it through grammatical structures. What he's saying is that the majority of meanings in Arabic do not come from words. So any methodology that tells you to memorize words as a primary activity is doomed to fail, because the majority of meanings, they're not coming from words anyways. They're coming from vowels and patterns and grammatical structures. So lesson number 1 is stop memorizing words. The next thing is that it's very few people that would recommend to not study grammar. Like, everybody intuitively understands that you gotta be able to appreciate how the words connect together, and when they connect, then how do you differentiate between the roles of the nouns? This is what grammar is all about. Okay, but then there's certain grammar that's more to do with labeling and categorizing. So like the noun in the Arabic language could be categorized based on gender, masculine and feminine. There's no neutral, there's masculine and feminine is based on particular signs at the end of the nouns, that when those signs are there, then the noun is considered feminine. And if there's no signs, then by default the noun would be masculine. And this doesn't just apply to men and women, it also applies to inanimate objects like trees, or like a car, or a house. Right? So that's gender classification. And then nouns could be categorized based on whether they're definite or indefinite. And the categories are definite, proper nouns. And then we have various kinds of pronouns. And then nouns could be categorized based on plurality. We have the singular, we have the dual, and the plural. And then the plural could be a sound plural, it could be a broken plural. So these are categorizations, noun categorizations, that are relatively easy to explain. And people, when they study these things and they memorize the terminology associated to all of these categories, then it feels like you're making progress. But truth be told, this is all low impact and it's basic grammar. So lesson 2 is stop studying basic grammar and nail down high impact grammar first, because that's the grammar that will empower you to be able to read a book. Because you can spend years studying basic grammar and still not be able to translate sentences accurately and correctly. Okay, as part of studying the language, there's one area which we call verb conjugation. It's an important area of classical Arabic, and there's books that are written specifically about verb conjugation, because the meanings in Arabic, they come from combining 3 letters together. So every group of 3 letters has an associated meaning. So there's like 29 letters in the alphabet, they're all consonants. Like ba is the equivalent of a B, ta is the equivalent of a T, jim is the equivalent of a J, etc., etc. So the way meanings are communicated in Arabic is that these consonants are grouped into groups of 3. Every group of 3 consonants has an associated meaning. So when you take noon, sad, and ra and group those letters in that order, you get the meaning of helping. When you take jim, lam, and sin and group those letters together, then you get the meaning of sitting down. So like this, every group of 3 letters has an associated meaning. But the problem is that letters on their own, consonants on their own, they're not pronounceable. So if you string 3 letters from the alphabet together and try to pronounce them, you wouldn't be able to. Like kaf, ta, and ba, if you string them together and say, you see, nothing happened. The reason is because when people speak, they speak in syllables. And a syllable is the sound that's achieved when you combine a consonant with a vowel. So if you have 3 consonants, you need at least 3 vowels. Only then would you have something that you can pronounce. So the vowels, naturally, they're there. In the Arabic language, we have vowels, but they're not part of the alphabet. They're represented on top of the consonants via symbols. And we have one of them is called a dhamma, it's the equivalent of an O or a U. And there's a second one that's the equivalent of an A. And there's a third one that's the equivalent of an I or an E. So we have bu, ba, and bi. So if you have 3 consonants, then you would need at least 3 vowels in order to create syllables that would make those letters pronounceable. So the vowels are added, and they do that. They remove the limitation and they make the consonants pronounceable. But not only that, they add more meaning. So the meaning that's achieved from the vowel pattern, we call this a pattern, would be tense and voice. So you know that the hitting happened in the past, or the hitting is happening now, or the hitting is active or if it's passive. Like he helped versus he was helped. So where do we get that from? We get that from the vowels. And then there's some extra letters that are added to the beginning and the end of the verb in order to enhance the meaning coming from the base. So in a nutshell, what I just mentioned there in the last couple of minutes is the subject matter of a science in Arabic called Sarf. Okay, Sarf is about verb conjugation. Sarf is about taking a verb and combining it with the pronoun, because the pronoun, unlike English, is actually written alongside the verb, connected together to the point that it looks like a single word. And then since Arabic has a dual, so that's why there's like more. There's like 14 possible ways a verb could be conjugated based on gender and plurality. Like he, they, she, they, and then 6 U's, depending on who you're talking to. And then I and we. So Sarf is the area of classical Arabic that deals with all of this. And the rules of Sarf are self-contained, which means that you can master them and you can understand them in isolation. And they're relatively simple, and they could and should be mastered early on. So lesson 3 is master Sarf quickly, because mastering Sarf initially will make vocabulary acquisition a breeze. When you transition from high impact grammar that will take a few hours spread over a few days, once you master all of that, at this level is just theory. Like you understand conceptually how the language works. You have a bird's eye view of the entire language. But then when you open up the book and start encountering actual sentences within the book, now it's a matter of applying the theory to the examples that are coming in the book. You can congratulate yourself because you've hit your first milestone. And the minute the book begins, 2 things happen. First of all, the enthusiasm level of the student goes through the roof because they no longer have to wait for a payoff. They're getting all of their results by as soon as the 3rd week of class. The second thing that happens is all of the theory comes to life. So this is a very challenging part. The 3rd, 4th week of study is actually the most challenging because it's front loaded and all of the considerable effort is happening in these opening weeks. You see? But the promise is that if you get through this initial stage, then the next 4 weeks will only be half as challenging as the first 4. So it's like a rocket. Like I read somewhere that 80% of the fuel that the rocket takes in order to launch into outer space is exhausted in the opening moments just to pass gravity. And once it's moved into orbit, then at that point very little fuel is required for it to continue on its journey. So Arabic is no different. All of the considerable effort is in the beginning, and once you pass that, then the results increase exponentially and the level of difficulty actually decreases proportionately. So lesson number 4 is that in the initial stages you need to remain focused and not be scared about the difficulty, because it's only temporary and it will subside, and your own newfound proficiency is what will propel you forward to keep studying and never give up. Now earlier I talked about the distinction between basic grammar and high impact grammar. So basic grammar are the low yield categorizations and classifications that most people spend the majority of their time on, like noun categorizations, or pronouns, things of that nature. And high impact grammar is understanding the processes and the mechanisms that govern the conveyance of non-word meanings. And if we have 22 possible ways that the noun could be used, and the case endings are only 3, then how is it possible to differentiate between so many different ways the noun could be used with only 3 case endings? So the reason is because a lot of them, they don't line up side by side. So there's no distinguishing to do, there's no differentiating to do. So if the same vowel was repurposed, then that would not be problematic. But a subject and an object, for example, that do occur side by side, if they had the same ending, then that would result in confusion, because the listener wouldn't know that whether Zayd did the hitting or was it Amr that did the hitting, because sequence does not determine grammar. So one issue is that sequence does not determine grammar. How does grammar solve this issue? By the grammatical states process. Another issue is that in a sentence that begins with a noun, a nominal sentence, there's no verb is. So if the sentence is long, you need to be able to tell from where to where is the subject, where to where is the predicate. So this is the problem that needs to be solved. So how does Arabic solve this issue? It's by teaching you that there's an inventory of about 12 phrases. A phrase is when 2 or more words are connected together and function as a single unit. Like the possessive phrase, where we have kitabu Zaydin, the word kitab, which means book, and the word Zayd, name of an individual, and then the particular way in which the 2 words are connected, where noun A needs to be empty of al and there shouldn't be any tanween, and the second word has a particular ending, Zaydin, as opposed to any other ending that was possible. So when these requirements are satisfied, then you end up getting more than what you started off with. So that's one kind of phrase. And then we have the descriptive phrase, where a noun and an adjective get together and they need to fully correspond. And then the 2 would function as a single unit. So we'd have tall boy as opposed to the boy is tall. So tall boy, and then the 2 words together connect and become the subject. The 2 words together connect and become the object. And the 2 words together are following a preposition, etc., etc. So sentences can become long. And when they're long, you need to be able to distinguish and tell from where to where is the subject, where to where is the predicate. In English, this is a non-issue, because English has a verb to be. In Arabic, there is no is. So the problem is the lack of is issue. So how does Arabic solve this problem? By teaching you that there's 12 or so phrases, and if you know them all and you know their requirements, you can move from right to left and see those phrases connect. And at some point, there will be no further phrase level relationships. So wherever all of the phrases exhaust, that's where you drop the is, and that's where the predicate begins. So what I just did there in those 2 examples is I framed the broader grammar topics as solutions to comprehension issues. Within grammar, there's also subtopics, and every subtopic is also the solution to a comprehension issue. So lesson number 5 is to always study grammar topics, whether it's high-level broad grammar or it's a subtopic, and understand it as a solution to a comprehension issue. So you have to ask the question, what problem is this grammar topic solving? So if you do it this way, then you study it once and you will know it really well, and you'll be able to see the application of it immediately. So that's the lesson 5. Coming back to our initial topic about vocabulary acquisition, because we said vocabulary is the least important part of the Arabic language, but you still need to pick up words. So what you do is you start with a reading text that is low on vocabulary, because right now our goal is to reinforce the grammar. Okay, because we know that understanding the mechanism, understanding the broad, high-level grammar principles is more important. So we're picking up words, but it's like 4 or 5 new words on the page. And we're reading stories, and it's like selling idols. And Azar and Ibrahim alayhi salam had a father, and his father's name was Azar, and Azar was a famous man, and Azar used to sell idols. So there's some words that are appearing, but the words, the vocabulary is light. It's light vocabulary, and the goal right now is not to become fluent. The goal right now is to be exposed to more and more grammatical scenarios through the medium of the text. So we're reinforcing what we learned in the front loading, and we're also learning new things based on need and necessity. So this is the next stage. And then at some point, when you've picked up quite a few words, then you want to dramatically enhance your vocabulary acquisition. So this is when we introduce guided reading type 2. And guided reading type 2 is when we pick authors that are at the top of the food chain when it comes to eloquence and when it comes to rhythmic Arabic that has a Quranic cadence. So like the Companions book, Suwar min Hayati Sahaba, and also the Egyptian author, who in the last 100, 150 years is probably the best author who has the most elevated and most rhythmic prose. His name is Mustafa Lutfi al-Manfuluti. So we get books by these authors, and we don't study random books. And we mine those passages and those pages for more and more vocabulary. So what you do now is you switch into extensive guided reading type 2. So type 1 is light in vocabulary. The main objective is to expose the student to the majority of grammatical scenarios informally without a textbook. And then once we've gone through about 6 months of guided reading type 1, what we do now is we move into guided reading type 2, and over there we want to now acquire tens of thousands of words, and is done by extensive reading from authors that are highly eloquent and highly expressive. So lesson 6 would be to pick books for guided reading from authors that are renowned and write really well, and avoid just random books. Once you're comfortable and you've seen the majority of grammatical scenarios in action, what you would want to do now is you would want to study grammar formally. And the big mistake is people start with grammar. So they do a matan like al-ajrumiyya, and they start with that, and they don't know how the language works. And you need to realize that those grammar manuals, the classic grammar manuals, were written centuries ago for students that were native, and they already knew intuitively how the language works. So they were taught the noun categorizations, and they were taught about i'rab indicators and the various ways that nouns and verbs could be reflected. So everything that's taught in the initial stages, you would want to revisit it again through the medium of a classical grammar book, cover to cover, and this is where you'll learn how to read without vowels. So in order to be able to read without vowels, you would need a teacher that could correct you, but not just point out where the mistake is, but also zoom in on the degree of the confusion, so that you could make all of the mistakes. So you fail early and you make the mistakes, and then the teacher explains to you the degree of the error so that you can note that, and then you don't make that same mistake again. So eventually you'll be doing it correctly, you'll remember the success, and you'll forget all of your failures, and this is how proficiency is attained. So that lesson number 7 is learn to read without vowels by being corrected by a teacher that could explain to you not just the mistakes you're making, but also why you're making those mistakes. At several occasions, I talked about high impact grammar. So if you want a thorough explanation of all of the high impact grammar that's needed in order to begin reading, then check out this video here. It's about 3 hours long, and it's not meant to be watched in a single sitting. You can spread it over a few days. So go ahead and begin with that, and I look forward to speaking with you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.